And welcome in, folks, to another edition of Open Mic Night. I am your host, Noah Taluki, and on today's episode, yes, folks, the Lions, vintage Matthew Stafford coming back and winning the ball game 23-22 in Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. The miracle at Mercedes-Benz, as some people are calling it out there. We'll break that game down for you. Also, Lions 3-3 now. Should we start believing now? We'll get more into that. Also, going to break down the next game for the Lions, which are against the Indianapolis Colts, a winning football team, 4-2 record, coming off of a bye week. Lions are going to be at home. And we will also have a special guest later. It is Jeremy Reisman, the beat writer for Pride of Detroit. He will be on the podcast later to talk a little bit about his career as well as the current state of the Lions. But, folks, it was an awesome weekend for the Lions. Big win. And for any college football fans out there, big win for Michigan over Minnesota. Unfortunately, bad loss for Michigan State to Rutgers, a team that lost, I believe, 21 straight Big Ten games. So Spartans definitely need to get it together against Michigan next week for the Paul Bunyan Trophy. Big game as always. I see Michigan winning it, but you never know. These rivalry games, anything can happen. I'm not counting Michigan State out just yet, even with a bad loss to Rutgers. But I really want to focus on the Lions for this episode. Maybe in the next few weeks we'll talk some more college football, but this is a huge Lions victory. 12-yard game-winning touchdown pass from Matthew Stafford to T.J. Hawkinson. And I was in my room watching it with a few Lions buddies of mine. And I was just so excited. My hands just went through the roof. As soon as they scored that touchdown, we were jumping up and down. We were celebrating. I was yelling. It was awesome. Just shouting. Awesome. Just joy. Elation that the Lions were finally able to come back and win. And the first thing I thought of was, that's the Stafford I know. That's the Stafford I grew up watching. Coming back and winning ball games. Give this guy the ball. He's going to win the game. 36th game-winning drive in his career for Matthew Stafford. He had 8 of them back in 2016. That's the Stafford I remember. The 2016 Stafford, the 2011 Stafford. Those kind of Staffords. This was really fun to see. And doing it in Atlanta, where he owns a home, going up against his good buddy Matt Ryan, where his wife Kelly's from. Kind of had that hometown feel, I guess, to him. And it was a great win. Definitely, I think, one of the better wins of Stafford's career. So definitely awesome to see. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how this Lions team progresses. You know, we're going to get more into the Colts later, but big game against the Colts. I think that is a game that will tell if the Lions are for real or not. And it's a game that they definitely have to win. It'll be at home, coming home from the South after 2 games coming up, and should be a game that they really need to win. They need to play well, and we'll get more into that later. But I want to discuss more about this game. Obviously, vintage Matthew Stafford playing out there. But I want to talk a little bit about the defense, because I think the defense played better in this game. I mean, you saw it against the run especially. I mean, only 66 yards they gave up on the ground, which was nothing. I mean, literally, they were saying on the broadcast, the Falcons just cannot run against this Detroit defense. That was impressive to see. Obviously, the passing game needs some work. Matt Ryan, especially in the second half, kind of took over and was throwing darts to everybody. You know, Julio was making some great catches. Calvin Ridley was wide open on some balls. Russell Gage even made that nice one-handed grab after what appeared to be a very serious knee injury in the first quarter, I believe. He came back and was running on all cylinders. So the pass defense definitely needs to get better. It's a young secondary. Okudah, Oruwariye, a couple other guys in the mix. It's definitely a young secondary that they possibly could be gelling more as the season goes on. Hopefully this is a start. Hopefully they can play better pass coverage, because I think the DBs on defense are what's going to help carry this team. Now, I know in the past I've talked about pressure and all that. I think in the last few weeks, it's evident that the Lions can stop the run, and it's evident that they can get pressure when necessary. The Lions defense really stepped up. They had the big Okora strip sack. Trey Flowers recovered that set up a Lions field goal to take the lead, and then Todd Gurley scoring. And I know that's been all over social media and saying that he basically gave the Lions game away, but I'm going to be honest with you. As soon as that 2-minute warning hit, the first thing that crossed my mind was, let them score. Because we need the ball back. Let them score. And we've seen Bill Belichick do this in the past, and we all know Matt Patricia is a disciple of Bill Belichick. I was telling my friends, and I was texting a couple of them as well, I said, let them score. Let them score, and then we get the ball back. And Patricia pulled his inner Bill Belichick out of him, and they let them score. And Todd Gurley, I could tell he thought he had a walk-in touchdown and then kind of realized at the last second what the Lions were trying to do. And then he tried to stop at the 1 yard line, the half yard line, but then his momentum kind of eased him in, sort of like that Super Bowl 46 run that Ahmad Bradshaw had, I believe, where the Patriots let the Giants score but they couldn't come back. Kind of like that momentum where he tries to stop and then rolls in. That's what I was thinking. Todd Gurley scoring on accident. I know you don't hear about that often, but then that gave Stafford, I believe there was a minute 10, minute 2, somewhere in there of time left, and he just took that team right down the field, and Golladay just made an absolutely crazy catch. I mean, over the defensive back. Looked like he was going to tip it away, and then it just fell right into his hands at about, I think, the 12-yard line, and that's where Stafford did the rest. I mean, it was incredible. Kenny Golladay, also a player that stepped up, 6 receptions for 114 yards, caught all 6 of his targets. Some of those balls looked like they're going to be overthrown by Stafford. He somehow leapt up and made those catches in front of Julio Jones and all those Falcon receivers. Kenny Golladay really, really making a statement. He wants to get paid, according to his social media post. It's going to cost you, like last week against Jacksonville. That's up for our interpretation, though, he said about what that means. So Kenny's stepping up big. I thought Swift had some nice carries. Lions didn't necessarily get their running game going. I believe they only had 64 rushing yards, so definitely something that they need to work on more, but they did enough in the passing game to help them win the ball game. Also, going back to some of the defense, I like how they were mixing it up, playing a little more zone, stopping the run, only giving up 66 yards. Also, there were plays where Matt Ryan looked lost out there because the Lions were given some looks that kind of threw Ryan off. Maybe more man looks, and then they turned into zone. And then that totally fooled him, and then Ryan was sacked twice, actually, by Romeo Okwara. 5 tackles for loss the Lions defense had as well. So if they can start disguising some of these looks, getting a little more creative on defense, starting to bring some more pressure, I could see this team winning some games, especially with the schedule that the Lions have. And that kind of brings me to my next point. You're going to hear from Lions haters, of course, out there. Every time we win, there's going to be people out there that might not have appreciated the win. And, I can understand, I guess, from that aspect, because a lot of people don't like Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, and just gives Sheila another reason to keep him around, even though they've obviously showed some incompetencies. But this is how I view it. I don't view it like that as of now, unless we start losing. But what do you get paid to do in the NFL? You get paid to win games. And you know what Matt Patricia is doing the last 2 weeks? He's winning games. And he's actually being a little smart about it, mixing up those coverages. Heck, even on the challenge, remember the third down, incomplete pass? Then Jack Fox, when he was punting, did the little thing under center to try to mix it up and throw the Falcons off. But then nobody saw it except him. He saw that there was 12 men on the field. That's something that Bill Belichick would have done. Pulling a Bill Belichick on us, challenging that the eye in the sky is for real. And that was genius by Patricia, because I didn't even see it. The TV camera sometimes doesn't show the whole picture. That was just something I didn't see. Kudos to Matt Patricia for throwing that flag. Excellent, excellent job by the Lions on that end. But back to my point. There is always going to be haters. And look, they say, oh, well, we beat a bad Atlanta team and all that. But this is what I'm going to say. And then the other thing, they barely beat them on the road. The NFL, there's so much talent in the NFL. Every team, there's some teams that are really, really good with talent. Other teams really, really bad. Kind of like maybe the Chiefs are in that really, really good category. The Jets are probably in that really, really bad category. But for the most part, everybody has some sort of talent. And that's the beauty of the NFL. Anything can happen in any given week. Look at the Jets-Bills game. Jets are horrible. Bills are pretty good. Bills won, but they only won 18-10. Just an example of how anything can happen in any week. The defense could step up. Guy could get hurt. One guy could be a secret weapon for the whole year and then finally have his breakout moment that game and totally flip the script. So I don't think of it as, barely beating anybody. This is the NFL. Anything can happen on any given week. And you're paid to win. And I really applaud the Lions for winning this one, getting back to 500, kind of getting back into that playoff mix. Now, as I say that, the Colts, 4-2. They're coming off of a bye week. They're a good football team. They have a good defense. Their offense is not really as superb as their defense. But offensively, they do have some targets that they can mix into games. 7 receivers or tight ends with over 100 yards receiving for the Colts. T.Y. Hilton leading the pack. Still has not caught a touchdown yet this season. He's definitely their number one threat. They're going to have Zach Pascal also. Mo Alley Cox, we'll see if he plays. They also have Trey Burton, Jack Doyle in the mix at tight end. Lions kind of struggled against defending Hayden Hurst, tight end for Atlanta. So definitely going to have to keep an eye out. Trey Burton had a great game a couple weeks ago. Mo Alley Cox, we'll see if he plays because he's been hurt. But only 7 touchdown passes for Phillip Rivers. He's definitely not the same Phillip Rivers for maybe 10 years ago. Definitely getting a lot older, but pretty accurate this season, just under 70%. Jonathan Taylor has been a nice addition in the backfield, just over 360 yards and 3 touchdowns. Definitely have to watch out for him. But the Lions, they've been doing a great job against the run the last few weeks. So I could see the Lions feasting against the run again. But the Colts do have a decent offensive line, especially with Quentin Nelson, an all-pro guard. So we'll have to see on that offensive end. But defense doing a great, great job. Khari Willis, starting safety. He is from Jackson Lumen Christi High School in Michigan. Great season. Colts with 10 interceptions on defense. 2 by Julian Blackman and TJ Carey apiece. And in terms of sacking the quarterback, they've had 13 this season. So stout defense, 4-2. They did drop a early season week 1 loss to Jacksonville, which was kind of surprising, 27-20. They won their next 3. Minnesota, 28-11. New York Jets beating them 36-7. Beating Chicago 19-11 in a close one. A team that, of course, the Lions lost to earlier in the season. Then they lost to the Browns in Cleveland, and then they beat the Bengals 31-27. They've had a couple close losses this season. So it's going to be interesting because, the Colts have played a couple of winning teams. They've played Cleveland. They've played Chicago. But that's really been about it. So they haven't been tested a whole lot, I should say. Of course, one of those games, they did beat Chicago. But there's been a couple of those games where it's been against teams that aren't really as good. We see the Minnesotas, the Jets, who are arguably the worst team in football. Jacksonville, we all know how that is. Cincinnati rookie quarterback and Joe Burrow. So this is going to be a game that tests the Colts as well. I expect a good game here. I think it's going to be good on both sides. I think the Lions definitely need to stop the pass, and especially with all the weapons that the Colts have, will they start playing a little more zone coverage like they've done in the last few weeks? Will they start mixing it up for old man Phillip Rivers? Will the Colts have enough confidence to run the football, run Jonathan Taylor against a Lions team that has been showing a lot of promise in terms of stopping the run? Colts defense, by the way, very, very stellar against the pass, only allowing about 200 yards net passing yards per game, and have only allowed 7 passing touchdowns all season. Meanwhile, rushing, they're allowing about 3.5 yards a carry and about 88 yards a game, but they've only allowed 4 rushing touchdowns. It's a very stout defense, 16 points per game that they allow, but, I can maybe see, especially from those numbers, I can maybe see the Lions trying to establish the run. And if they can get a hold of those defensive linemen, if they stick with Swift, that burst of energy that he has, maybe mix in AP a little bit, I think the Lions could have a good day running the football. But we'll have to see. Their bread and butter has been more on the passing side. but I wouldn't be surprised if they start running the ball against this Colts defense. Establishing that run in the trenches, that's going to be where the game is won, in the trenches. 1 week at a time. If the Lions could beat a good Colts football team against a good defense, winning record, I think they should win the next few games. I really do, but it's always 1 week at a time. Can never overthink with this team. 3-3 record. We'll see if they can make it 4-3 come Sunday. And welcome back here to Open Mic Night, where we have a special guest in Jeremy Reisman. He's the Lions beat writer for Pride of Detroit. You can find them all over social media. Jeremy, thank you again for joining us here on Open Mic Night.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me, Noah.
So I just wanted to ask you first, before we get into some Lions talk, you're the beat writer for Pride of Detroit. So I just kind of want to know, how did you get started as a writer?
Yeah, it's kind of a unique story. I didn't really take the normal route of, going to school for journalism or anything like that. Writing was just kind of a hobby for me for a while. It kind of helped me cope as a fan. Back in 2008, that's when I started writing about the team. And obviously that was a rough year for the Lions. So I was just kind of doing it as a side thing, not getting paid for it or anything. And then, I stumble upon Pride of Detroit. It was a really cool site, really fun community. They had an opportunity, and we still do, for fan posts, which is just anyone who signs up for an account can write their own posts. I just kind of developed a style there for a while, and the guy who was running the site at the time, Sean Ewell, noticed me after a while. He's like, hey, do you want to just start writing for the site as well? And it, again, didn't really come with a pay or anything like that. It was just another fun thing I was doing on the side. And so I took the opportunity. I continued to grow. I continued to just put in the work. And eventually when he decided to step down 5 years ago, I was the first name kind of on his list to take over. And so I jumped. Again, it was all just about jumping on the opportunity, taking whatever platform I had and running with it. And so, 5 years later, I'm in my fifth year running the site. We're credentialed with the Lions, and it's been a crazy ride.
So talk a little bit more about how Pride of Detroit, started up. And for those who are listening, kind of what exactly is Pride of Detroit?
Yeah, so it's part of the SB Nation group of blogs. They have a blog for basically every single professional sports team. Pride of Detroit is all about fans. We're a fan community. We still have our comment section. We do a lot of comment section interactive stuff. We do polls. We do mock drafts with our fans. All the people that write for the site are fans. So we kind of walk that line of being a reporter and fan. I try to be objective as possible, but at the same time, I really want to keep the emotion in my writing, because I think fans react to that. I think fans like to hear when the people writing stories about the team are also emotionally invested. So it's kind of a unique site in terms of community and I think in terms of content that we put out.
So what's it been like this season, covering the Lions? Obviously, limited attendance at games and media coverage and all that. I mean, do you guys get to travel at all? You got to stay back home? What's that whole process been like?
Yeah, it's been an adjustment. I had been going to all the home games as credentialed media, in the press room and all that sort of stuff, and in the locker room during the week and things like that. So everything's obviously done virtually at this point. I kind of made the executive decision to stay at home during games. I could still be going to games if I wanted to, but I feel a little more comfortable at home. There's a lot more I can do at home. I actually do a little bit of live streaming during games to provide kind of a new interactive experience for Lions fans that maybe don't want to listen to the national announcers. And then, yeah, in terms of, the Zoom conferences, it's a really big loss, I think. Not being able to have those one-on-ones in the locker rooms and kind of more informal conversations with the players, get to know them a little better as people. You really don't have that opportunity on Zoom calls that are really group Zoom calls. So I think it's a big adjustment that we're all still getting used to. I'm eager to get back there in Allen Park and be there in the locker room and watch practices and things like that. But we're making do.
So big win for the Lions, 1-point victory over the Atlanta Falcons. Talk about this team right now, sitting at 3-3. Can you see this team, making a possible run, later on in the season?
It's certainly possible. There are a lot of good things kind of working in their favor right now. I think the biggest one being their schedule. There's a tough game against the Colts coming up, but they've got the Vikings a couple times. They've got Houston. It could, they could certainly string off some more wins here. And I think they've shown significant improvement. I know their last two wins came against teams that are 1-6, and that shouldn't be overlooked. But their defense has really, really improved. And I think it's more than just a mirage. The Jaguars had a good running game. Lions stopped them. Falcons had a pretty good running game. Todd Gurley was having a pretty solid season up until Sunday. Lions stopped them. And we saw some schematic changes too. So defensively, we've definitely seen some improvement that I think might be somewhat sustainable. The question is whether the offense can kind of get going, because even against the Falcons, they only had 16 points until that final drive. So that they really need to get going and see a little more consistency there. And then, I think this team could be considered, probably not going to challenge Green Bay for the division, but given that there's that extra wild card spot this season, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Lions in contention for it in December.
You mentioned that defense, how it's slowly been improving the last few weeks, giving up, I believe, like 44 rushing yards to the Jaguars, 64, I believe, now to the Falcons. What has been the keys, really, the last few weeks that the defense has really stepped up to stop the run?
I really think the key is just how they're using their defensive line. We saw them kind of have more of a spread-out approach through the first 3 or 4 games. Now they've been doing this defensive tackle look that seems to be really working for them. They got 3 guys out there that usually it's either John Pennicini, their rookie, playing nose tackle. Then they have either Nick Williams or Deshaun Hand on one of the 3 techs, and then on the other one, you got Danny Shelton there. And those 3 guys have done a phenomenal job really all season. I feel like they're just putting them in better positions now over these past 2 weeks specifically, and the results really speak for themselves. I think it's really more of an over-reliance now on those defensive tackles, maybe taking some of the responsibilities away from their linebacking crew, which has notably struggled for years now.
So another part of the defense that's really critical for the Lions is that secondary. The secondary, very young. Obviously, Jeff Okudah, rookie. Armani Aruarie also. Trufant is out. So it's a little bit young, but how do you see this defensive backfield improving, moving forward throughout the season?
Yeah, it's just about learning, I think, with some of these guys. We all talk about Jeff Okudah and how much he's struggling and how much maybe he'll potentially get better, but this is still really early in Armani Aruarie's career as well. He doesn't have a ton of starts under his belt, so you just kind of hope there's a little bit of natural progression there, natural improvement just by means of experience. But they also might see a little bit of bump if they get some of their guys back from injuries. Justin Coleman is practicing again. Hopefully he'll be off IR soon. And then, as you mentioned, Desmond Trufant has been out, but it looks like he's trending towards getting closer to playing as well. And I know both those guys didn't look great in the opener, but again, early in the season, these guys didn't have much of an offseason. Hopefully both those guys can come back and look like their old selves.
Switch more to the offensive side of the ball. We saw Kenny Golladay have an excellent game yesterday, 6 receptions for 114 yards, made some amazing circus catches. Now, the whole talk with him the last few weeks has really been about, do you give him another contract? Do you pay him and all that? What do you think of that? Do you think, I know this is, obviously early in the season, probably looking more towards that off season, but, at this point, has he done enough already just to say, hey, go and pay him?
I mean, it's really hard to argue not. He looked amazing. It's like a top 10 receiver against the Falcons. Every single one of those catches was phenomenal and huge in the game. Obviously, he had the catch of the game that brought them down to the 8-yard line, although the rest, for some reason, moved back to the 11 right before the game-winning score. I think the question was always whether he was worth kind of that elite money, whether he was maybe a top 10 receiver. And I think those questions are still valid. He's not particularly great at creating separation, but he's just so good with those contested catches that it doesn't even seem to matter that he doesn't get separation, because those 50-50 balls are really more like 80-20 balls or 90-10 balls, because he's so good in those situations, and that's valuable. I mean, we've seen it over the past couple of weeks, just how different the pass offense has looked, just how different Matthew Stafford looked in that game, just by means of Kenny Golladay pulling down everything that's thrown his way. So I personally think it makes a big difference. The question is what do the Lions do? And we know this Lions team really likes to establish the run. That's kind of what they want this team's identity to be. And that might mean moving on from a guy like Kenny Golladay, because it's not an investment in the part of the team where they want to invest in. So I'm curious to see what the Lions will do, but if it was my choice, he'd probably already have the paper signed.
Jeremy Reisman, Lions beat writer for Pride of Detroit, joining us. So I want to switch over more to the backfield now. We've seen the Lions a couple games this season go with that running back by committee. They'll give Adrian Peterson a couple drives, and they'll go with Swift, maybe carry on for a couple drives. in the last few weeks, they've really stuck with DeAndre Swift as their bell cow. Do you think we're going to see more DeAndre Swift throughout the season, or do you think the Lions could revert kind of back to that running back by committee in a couple games?
Yeah, I think they're always going to have at least some sort of semblance of that running back by committee. They do like Adrian Peterson a lot. I think they don't want to overwork any of the running backs. We've seen so many running back injuries with the Lions over the past 10, 15 years, and Matt Patricia knows that. He knows that there's really only a handful of guys in the NFL that can really carry it 20 to 30 times a game, and I don't think they want that out of DeAndre Swift, especially this early in his career. So I think you'll eventually see Swift take over the majority of the carries, but it's still probably going to be something like a 60-40 split. I don't think they really want him touching the ball more than 25 times a game, which probably means somewhere between, I would say 10 to 15 carries per game for Swift is probably what they're aiming for, with another 5 to 10 to either Adrian Peterson or Kerryon Johnson.
I know a couple for the last few weeks. There's been some talk of some trades that could possibly happen with the Lions. Obviously the number one name, Matthew Stafford. Could he go to Dallas? And they looks like they lost Andy Dalton for a little bit now too. So besides even Stafford included, do you see the Lions making any sort of trades? As in the next coming weeks? That's a really interesting question. We're just a week away from the trade deadline here, and it's not really clear if the Lions are buyers or sellers, right? I think that's the first question you kind of have to broach. Are they selling? Are they really trying to compete this year? And given all the talk about Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn maybe having their jobs on the line this year, you have to imagine they're not ready to sell, especially at 3-3, especially with maybe the Bears looking not as good as they looked. And really, the extra wild card this year makes them contenders at 500. So I think they're probably more likely buyers at this point, and you really just have to look to the defensive side of the ball. The team could use another linebacker that can cover. They could use another pass rusher, even though I think Romeo Okwara is playing particularly well right now. They could probably even use maybe a veteran presence there in the secondary, considering all the issues they've had with Desmond Trufant. I wouldn't expect them to sell off any of their offensive pieces. I think Matthew Stafford being traded is almost at 0% chance of happening. Maybe someone like Marvin Jones gets moved because he's on the final year of his contract and maybe not playing as well as he has in previous seasons. But I really would expect if this team makes any move at all, I think it happens on the defensive side of the ball, and I think they try to add somebody. Final question for you, Jeremy. The golden question that a lot of fans really want to know, what's the situation with Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia? Are they going to be back next season? 3-3 now. It seems like they've proven enough to be back, but obviously this thing can go either way. So do you think Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia so far will be back for next season?
I'm probably hedging my answer here a little bit, but it really it depends on the next 10 games. They've certainly bought themselves time because they were really under the gun there with the 1-3 start, but they came out of that bye week and they did a lot of things a lot of people didn't expect them to do. They made some changes on defense. They got a little more aggressive. They played a little bit more zone. They started sending more blitzes. I think they sent the most blitz. They had their highest blitz percentage last week against the Falcons. So they've made some changes that really they've been stubborn to make the first 2 years under Matt Patricia. So that sort of stuff is definitely going to be noticed. It's already had an impact on their win-loss record. So if this team can reach, I would say 9-7, even if that doesn't mean making the playoffs, I think that probably saves their jobs. And I do think that's more than possible, more than, definitely in the realm of possibilities. Will it happen? I wish I could tell you, because I was right there expecting maybe even a mid-season move a couple weeks ago. Things can change in a hurry here in the NFL, so we'll really see how they react to these next 4 or 5 games. And if they're, a couple games above 500, I think they've probably maybe even sealed their job for next year.
Jeremy Reisman, Lions beat writer for Pride of Detroit. You can follow them at Pride of Detroit on Twitter. And you can follow Reisman at Detroit on Lion on Twitter as well. Jeremy, thank you again very much for joining us here.
No problem, no. Thanks for having me.
We want to thank Jeremy Reisman from Pride of Detroit for coming on and giving us a little bit of his time from his busy schedule. Thank him again. Great interview. Great to always get some Lions insight. My favorite team, of course, and I really, really hope they can get to that 4-3 record and beat the Colts next week to finally get above 500. Also, big game Saturday. Michigan and Michigan State for the Paul Bunyan Trophy. We may talk a little bit about that next week. Also in the works of trying to get another ex-Lion on the podcast, so it should be fun next week. Don't forget to tune in only on Open Mic Night.